Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Mohammed Kubai. In this video, we will go through how to deploy Citrix NetScaler VPX instance on Microsoft Azure. So if you want to learn more about Citrix Azure, so you can check out my best-selling Udemy course, which is also available in Udemy for Business. So when you deploy Citrix NetScaler on Azure, either you can deploy it as a standalone or you can deploy it as a high available pairs. So you can get the image from the Azure Marketplace, or you can also deploy it over the ARM template using GitHub. So before you deploy your NetScaler, you need to make sure you have VNet as well as subnet. So and also you need to have three IP address, which is NSIP, SNIP, and virtual IP. So when it comes to the deployment model, we have three deployment model. One is multi-NIC multi-IP, another one is single NIC multi-IP, and another last one is single IP single NIC. So it depends on your requirement. You can choose which one. So in this lab, we are going to use multi-NIC with multi-IP, which is this particular deployment model. So when it comes to licensing, so you need to bring your own license to the Azure. By default, it comes with a free trial, so you can explore your lab, etc., using this particular option. So when you deploy NetScaler in Azure, you need to make sure that the maximum throughput, which is up to 10 Gbps, so you cannot achieve more than this. So these are the recommendation to choose the VM sizes in Azure. For example, let's say if you wanted to go with 200 Mbps, so it is to better to go with the D2S V5. Similarly, 1 Gbps D4 SV5. This is how you need to plan your VM in Azure to deploy the NetScaler. So let's begin. So in the Azure portal, we need to browse to virtual machine. Here under virtual machine, we need to select create new virtual machine. So the subscription, I'll choose Visual Studio, and the resource group, I'll choose CTX Management RG. Since NetScaler component, it comes under management component, so I'm going to choose Citrix Management RG. The name, I'm going to give a name as NS01. The location, which is Central US, because all my infrastructure, let's say my VNet, my VMs are hosted in Central US. So in this particular lab, I'm not going to choose availability zones. However, in the production infrastructure, always make sure you use the availability zone. So security type, currently it does not support trusted launch, so we need to go with the standard. Coming into image, this is very important. So here we need to go to see all image, and then he need to search for Citrix. So we need to select Citrix VPX 14.1. So let's select and let's click this. So automatically it will select the relevant SQ for the VM, so which is 2 vCPU and 8 GB RAM. So as per your requirement, you can increase the specification. Since this is a lab, I will keep B2MS, and then I will select password for the authentication. So the username, I'm going to type nsroot, then I'll define the password. So once this is defined, so public inbound ports, I'm not going to expose anything to the public, so I'll click on none. So I'll click next. So here by default, it is selected 20 GB and the premium SSD. Since this is a lab, I'll choose standard SSD just to save the cost. But in production infrastructure, you need to go with the premium. So I'll keep the key management as it is, and I'll go to the networking option. So here I'm going to choose the virtual network. So we already have a virtual network created for the Citrix infrastructure, which is CTX VNet. And under subnet, we already have a subnet for our management components. So I'll go with CTX management. So public IP address, I'm not going to define any public IP address. And NSG, also I'm going to keep it as none. Why? Because we already have a NSG attached to the Citrix management subnet. So that's it. Rest all options are I'm going to keep as it is, and then I'll click on review and create. So our review is completed. So let's click on create. So the deployment is completed. So we can go to the resource and we can see our virtual machine, which is our NetScaler. So if you go to the networking part, you'll get the IP address which is assigned to this particular NetScaler. So let's select the NIC card. So as you can see, by default 10.0.0.12, which is got assigned to the NIC or to the NetScaler. So this is nothing but our management IP. Also we call it as NSIP. So the first thing what we have to do, we need to make this a static. So if you go here, you have an option to select static. So let's click on save. So now it is changed to static. Similarly, we need to assign the IP address. So depending on your requirement, you can define a number of IP address here. So for a typical NetScaler deployment with the Citrix virtual apps and desktop, we normally need two virtual IPs. One virtual IP is for storefront load balancing and another virtual IP for the gateway. And then we need a SNIP. So basically we need three IPs to be defined over here. So let's click on add, and then we'll define IP config 2. So let's keep this as a private IP address because we don't want any public IP address. So let's define static. So I'm going to define 10.0.0.13. So this will be my snip. So let's click on add. Similarly, I'm going to define for my storefront and gateway. Storefront will be 14 and gateway will be 15. So as you can see, we have defined IP address for VIP as well as for the snip. So let's try to access our NetScaler. So I have a virtual machine. From there, I am going to access this particular IP address, which is 10.0.0.12. So this is my VM. So I'm going to connect. So I'm going to browse it to http colon double slash 10.0.0.12. So let's enter the credential which I have defined during the initial setup. So this is the initial wizard where you need to set up few things. For example, subnet IP address. So let's click this and let's click on continue. So let's define the subnet IP, which is 10.0.0.13. So let's click done. So if you wanted to define host name, DNS, etc., you can define it here. So let's click on continue. So now our NetScaler has been configured in the Microsoft Azure cloud. So if you wanted to upload the license or to connect to the Citrix license activation service, you can do this over here. So that's it. Our NetScaler setup has been completed in the Microsoft Azure. Now we can go ahead and configure the storefront load balancing as well as gateway.